Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 182. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with best-selling author Matthew Farrell about his latest book, The Woman at Number 6, a gripping psychological thriller with a killer twist. Matthew loves to write characters that a lot of readers can relate to. Typical families, suburban neighborhoods, and so on. But what he really loves is to interject turmoil into that world, to place his normal characters into abnormal situations where something important is at stake. Matthew believes this might be the key to his success with writing such great tension into his stories. The Woman at Number 6, as with all of Matthew's books, is a fast-paced, tension-filled ride. He admits that it is hard work to keep up the pace of the stories as he writes them. The end result, though? Well, the response from readers is that they can't put them down. In this episode, I'll chat with Matthew about his writing journey, how long it took him to finally break into the traditional publishing world, and what he means when he says he writes about real fear, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Matthew Farrell, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I thought what we could do is start by talking about your brand new release, The Marriage Breakup. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Sure. Well, by the time this airs, The Marriage Breakup will officially be renamed to The Woman at Number 6. I just got word from my publisher about that the other day. And The Woman at Number 6 is about a woman named Tracy Cohen, who seems to have the ideal life with her husband Malcolm and her son Finn. But one day, seemingly out of nowhere, Tracy asks Malcolm for a divorce. The day after she does that, Tracy goes missing, and no one knows if she's run away or was taken or if she's even still alive. And as the police close in on who they believe is their killer, another body is found in a different jurisdiction. And they have to figure out, is it all connected? Is the husband Malcolm behind any of it? And all secrets to be revealed if you order the book and read it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about characters and setting. What comes first for you when you write a book like this? What's the spark? Is it a character? Is it a piece of dialogue? Is it the setting? Is it just a plot point?
So in any book I've ever written, it always starts with a scene that just pops into my head. And I never know kind of what it's about, but it's the seed that grows into the eventual book. I don't want to give too much away, but for this particular book, I just had this scene of a woman lying in bed and she couldn't see. And the man comes into the room and kind of grabs her hand and tells her that, he's her husband. And she knows just from the sound of his voice and from the touch of his hand that he's not. And so I get this scene in my head, and I don't know kind of where I'm going with it. I don't know who the characters are. I don't know why she's in the bed. I don't know why she can't see. I don't know why the man is claiming to be her husband. So I kind of start to deconstruct the idea from that one scene in my head. And then over time, it becomes kind of a high level story. And then, by the time I sit down to write it, I typically have, the beginning, the end, and then kind of the general path that will get me to the end. And then, 9 times out of 10, that changes along the way. And it's very, very typical for me to start the book thinking that the killer is going to be one character and it ends up being someone totally different.
Really? Really? So you don't always know the ending before you start.
No, I kind of know what I think will be the ending, but I'm definitely a pantser. I do, very, very, very little plotting. And so, kind of the journey that the characters take through the story sometimes, reveals that pop up along the way or twists that take place kind of lead me down a different path to a different killer.
And I assume that means that you've had some surprises from your characters as you've written
Oh
these
yeah, I've
books.
I've had I've had such surprises where I've kind of popped up in the middle of the night. I see clearly at that point who the killer is going to be, and everything clicks into place. But that requires me going back and, at one book, I had to rewrite 40% of the book to get it to that killer. But it ended with one of the best twists I've had in my series. So it's well worth the hard work. And some people spend a lot of time before they sit down to write to create a really detailed outline, and the time that I take is kind of in the middle and on the back end of it, making everything work once I've gone through the process and let the characters kind of do their thing.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the characters for the woman at number 6. Can you tell us a little bit about the main characters, introduce them to us?
Sure. So Tracy Cohen is the main character, and she is a suburban housewife, married to her husband Malcolm, who owns a construction company in Hudson Valley, New York. They have a young son, Finn, and I would say typical suburban family, good neighborhood. Malcolm's really grew his business to a successful point, which is why he's so taken aback when Tracy kind of asks for a divorce out of nowhere. The reader learns down the road that it's not really for no reason, but I like writing characters that a lot of the majority of the readers can relate to. So typical family, typical suburban neighborhood, typical kind of issues and problems, and good memories as well that come with a marriage and a family and raising a young child. And then I like to kind of put turmoil into that world, and a murder can do that or a kidnapping can do that, and kind of see how regular folks would react to something as traumatic as that.
Well, and let's talk about that world that you've created for this book. Tell us a little bit about the setting and where you have placed this story.
Sure. So I live in Westchester County, New York, which is about 45 minutes north of Manhattan. So the majority of my books, as a matter of fact, all of my books except my debut, take place in this region, and kind of out a little bit outside of Westchester County, we just call the Hudson Valley. So all my books take place in the Hudson Valley, and it's just a nice suburban setting surrounded by mountains and the Hudson River, and you're an hour away from the beginning of the Catskills and the Adirondacks up north, and you're an hour away from the urban setting and the five boroughs in the city. So it's a nice setting in terms of it can be very outdoorsy and nature, and kind of take that aspect of it and you can make it really dark, or you can set some scenes or a book down into the city, and the whole excitement of Manhattan and Midtown can turn dark as well. So it's kind of the best of both worlds.
Let's talk about how you create tension in your stories because there's certainly a lot of it in your books. Do you have a magic formula for creating that tension, or does it just come naturally to you?
It comes natural. I always say I could never teach someone, I can never teach a creative writing class or anything because I don't know how I do it. I kind of just sit down with an idea and I just go. But for me, the tension is created, I let the characters kind of do their thing and kind of follow where they go. And the tension comes from, a combination of putting a quote unquote normal person into an abnormal situation, where something important is at stake, whether it's a life or a marriage or money or livelihood, whatever. And watching them react to that, and having to kind of get out of their comfort zone of, suburban mom, suburban dad, or boring regular family, and into something extraordinary to save a life or whatever the case may be. And mix in that some twists along the way where people you thought you could trust, you can. People you thought you couldn't trust, you can. And I like to keep the readers on their toes, but the characters are on their toes throughout the story as well. And I think the combination of that really creates good tension as you go along in all of the books.
And so for this latest book, The Woman at Number Six, did you have any surprises in this storyline when you sat down to write, or did it flow the way you kind of initially conceptualized it?
Oh no, I always have surprises. So I would say, for the most part, it flowed like I conceptualized it. I did have kind of, as I was writing it, I was teetering back and forth who the killer was going to be at the end. And it was going to be one of two people. And it wasn't until I probably got to the middle of the third act that I, settled on who it was going to be. And it was written. My agent edited it with me. We sent it to my editor. We went through 2 rounds of edits with my editor. And at that point, I thought of the final twist in the story, which is incredible. The feedback that I've been getting, no one sees it coming. Everyone's blown away. So it was well worth it. But it just goes to show you that we were probably 1 round of editing away from it being, set in stone, and getting ready for like line edits and stuff where you don't really change the story at that point. The book is the book, where I came up with this idea. So I always throw myself for a loop at any stage of the writing process, and I never know when that final, or if that final idea for a twist or a plot change or something is going to come. And in this case, with this book, it really came at the bottom of the ninth inning. But we got it in time to make it work, and the readers are loving it. So well worth it.
And what do you do at that point when it's so late in the game and you have a major change like that? I mean,
Well,
how do you scramble to get that done?
I just emailed my editor and I said, just I've got this incredible twist, and we called briefly. We had a 5-minute conversation just so I could tell her what it was, and she got super excited about it, and said, yeah, it's well worth waiting a couple extra days from the deadline while you write that all out. In this particular case, I was grateful that the twist did not require a whole lot of rewriting. So it was kind of I don't know, probably 3 or 4 days of going back into the manuscript and just making little tweaks here and there, and then writing the final scene to get it to work. But if it's a good enough twist and is really going to put the story over the top and kind of differentiate it from other books in that genre, or really blow the reader away, then it's worth stopping the presses and getting it done.
There's a lot of pressure to get a book out anyway, so I'm sure the pressure just increases when you need to make big last minute changes like that. And this came right on the heels of releasing another book just 6 months prior to The Woman at Number Six. So you had The Perfect Mother come out, I think, in October of last
Correct.
year. So there was, I'm guessing there was a lot going on when you were trying to get all this done.
There was, luckily, so I've always got, I would say the next 2 books in my head kind of working themselves out as I'm writing a book. So typically we'll get to the point where we're, doing line edits on a book that's about to come out. And, the hard work's pretty much done. We're just checking for typos and whatnot. And so I'll take a couple of weeks off, a month off, whatever, and then I'll dive right back into the next book. So by the time The Perfect Mother was being released in October, I was probably I was probably done with the first draft of Woman at Number Six anyway. So I'm always writing. I take very little time off in between books. So although you'd think it would be more chaotic, I'm a really, really good time manager. I was just blessed with that ability. So it wasn't as overwhelming to me because the first draft was done, which is always the hardest. And I love editing. So the fun part for me was about to begin. And, whether I had to promote the perfect mother a little bit while still going through the second draft of a marriage breakup, I was able to make it work. But yeah, there are times where it does get a little bit.
Well, let's talk about The Perfect Mother. Can you tell us a little bit about that book? Introduce us to those characters.
Sure. So The Perfect Mother is about a woman named Laura Anderson who receives a call from a cell phone she finds in the glove compartment of her car one day. When she answers the call, it's her daughter Nell on the other end who explains that she's been kidnapped. And the kidnappers have only given Laura a few hours to get to a cabin in upstate New York, or they say they're going to kill Nell. And along the way, Laura is forced to reveal secrets she's been hiding since childhood in order to prolong her daughter's life. And then once she gets to the cabin, we discover Laura will do absolutely anything to save Nell and keep her secrets safe.
Interesting. Once again, lots of tension.
So, yeah, this book. So I try to do something a little bit different with each book. My first four books were part of a series, the Adler and Dwyer series, and those are more police procedurals mixed with psychological thrillers. And I had done those four and kind of ended the series. And this next one, The Perfect Mother, was coming out, and I really wanted to do something different and challenge myself. And what I did on this book was I wanted to I wanted to make the action literally nonstop from the first page to the last page. I did not want to give the reader any point in the book where they could rest or say, oh, here's a slow part. I can close the book and go to sleep, or I can close the book and go make dinner or whatever. And my editor and I worked very, very hard pulling out anything that might have slowed the story down and really keeping the pedal to the floor the entire time. So, within the first three sentences of the beginning of the book, the tension is already there, and it lasts throughout the entire book. I wrote it hoping it would be kind of a one sitting read, and it's worked out that way. The feedback I've gotten from readers has just been, they've refused to bathe their children because they were reading it and didn't want to put it down. They were up all night and screwed up something at work the next day because they didn't want to put it down. They missed a bus stop because they didn't want to put it down. So that's really encouraging for me to hear, because that was what we set out to do on that one. So as far as tension goes, to circle back to your comment, this one is chock full of tension, and Laura is constantly forced to reveal things that she has kept hidden for 30 years because her daughter's life hangs in the balance. And along the way, she gets into some situations where, not only are the police looking to find out what happened to her daughter Nell, but they're also looking for her as she becomes a suspect in kind of a subplot. So yeah, the tension is there, and it does not stop until the last page. It's great.
And it's very interesting, I think, that a lot of your books feature families or family dynamics. Even going back to your first book, What Have You Done?
Hmm.
What is it about family dynamics that you think is just ripe for, say, the thriller and suspense genre?
Yeah, a lot of people have compared me to Harlan Coben, which is so flattering, but in the sense that, my thrillers are all typically suburban thrillers centered around families put in these types of situations. For me as a dad, I have two daughters. I think one of the most frightening things is anything ever happening to a member of my family, especially my children. And there's just this inherent horror that goes along with that the majority of readers can kind of tap into and feel with me. So whether you're, a member of a family or a head of a household or a partner with someone who's got, no kids, six kids, it doesn't matter. You're part of a unit in some capacity. And that setting and anything possibly happening to the people that you love, I think is just it's terrifying. So I kind of tap into that and like I said, kind of, take a normal day and make it something much, much worse that requires normal folks to do things they never dreamed they would ever have to do. And it just makes for a nice suspense thriller that, readers can relate to, which I love.
And it's curious that you mentioned that sort of scenario terrifies you, because I was going to ask what frightens you as a reader. Like, what do you find frightening to read? And is it the same thing you write about, or is it different?
So for like I'm a horror buff. Like I love horror books, horror movies, horror stories, but that's not real fear to me. That's just kind of like fun fear. Real fear to me is what I write about, and that's just something happening to people around you that you love, whether it be friends or family, and you not having control over what might happen next, or you having to take control over what happens next. And do you have the guts to do that? Do you have the wherewithal to do that? I think for me, that's definitely, I think writing about it is a little cathartic and kind of taps into that fear. And I think the reason why a lot of feedback I get from my readers is that my characters are so realistic is because I'm probably putting my voice into their dialogue as far as that real fear and conversation around that coming through.
You have a number of books out now. I'm just curious, were there any characters that you really enjoyed and that you miss now that their voices aren't really loud in your head?
I miss so when I wrote What Have You Done, there were two brothers, Liam and Sean Dwyer, and that was supposed to be a standalone. And then my next book, I Know Everything, introduced Susan Adler, who was a state police investigator in New York. And the first book took place in Philadelphia. So two different worlds, two different character settings, everything. And at the end, I just thought, oh, that would be cool if Susan met Liam kind of on an offhand chance. It was just kind of at the time it was just an homage to all the fans that read the first book. The first book was supremely successful, and we sold a lot of copies and got a lot of positive feedback on it. So it was kind of just like a little Easter egg I was throwing in there for the readers that read the first book. And when I was done with it, I said, I really feel like Susan has more to say. And I really like the idea of Liam having met her, and maybe I could make something out of that. So the two standalone books ended up kind of being origin stories for the next two books that were officially, the Adler and Dwyer series. So, those were the two characters that I thought I was done with. And then once the books were finished, I decided that I wasn't. And we were able to tell a little bit more of their story, which was cool. But for the most part, when I finish a book and I'm on to the next one, I go through so many ideas and twists and rounds of editing with my agent, rounds of editing with my editor, that I'm very comfortable kind of putting that that cast away and then moving on to the next thing. And the past two books have been standalone, and I really really enjoy the standalone thriller because there's so much more you can do and so much more freedom you have versus doing a series where you tend to be boxed in a little bit just because the readers become so familiar with the characters. So I'd say Susan and Liam were the characters that made an impression with me and made me want to write about them a little bit more. But for the most part, I'm able to put the cast of characters away from last book and move on to the next.
Your last two books have been standalones. Is that what's in store for you down the line? Say the next few books you have planning, are you planning standalones, or do you have another series in you?
No, I plan standalones for now. I just think for selfishly, it's a little bit more fun to write. I feel like the readers like the standalones a little bit more because they can pick anyone up. It's tough if you get into book number 7 of a series, and you have a brand new reader. Do they really want to commit to going all the way back to book 1 and read all of them? Is it hard for them to come in at book 4 in the middle and not kind of know what was going on previously? So the standalone gives the reader a little bit of freedom also to kind of just pick up a book that sounds good and start reading it. So for the foreseeable future, I'm thinking standalone, but I would definitely not rule out another series down the road because they're fun. I just don't think I would make a long series. I think a 3 or 4 book series is the way to go because it's not so overwhelming if you're coming in as a new reader, and it's enough of an arc that you can tell a really nice story about the characters and wrap everything up in that time frame.
Well, you mentioned that you always have at least a couple books that you're writing in your head. I assume you're working on more for your readers.
Yeah, so I am in my second round of edits with my agent for book number 7. And that's all I'm going to say about that because it's fantastic and it's going to be awesome, but I'm not revealing anything.
What other goals do you have as a writer? I mean, you've accomplished a lot. Do you have anything else still on your wish list of things to do?
Write the next Crawdads, make $20 million. That'd be pretty. I gotta say, I'm going to be 50 years old in August. I started writing seriously when I was 18. It took me 20 years to, kind of break into the traditional publishing world. My dreams have literally come true. We've sold almost 500,000 copies of my books, so readers are out there loving them. I can't really, I'm so grateful. I can't really ask for anything more. I'm just happy to have been invited to the party. I don't plan on leaving anytime soon. And, as long as there's readers out there who are, devouring the books, I'm going to keep writing them because it's such a blessing for me to be able to write knowing that people are going to have access to them, and the feedback that I get from my fans is just so incredible. It keeps me motivated and keeps me going. And when you've been chasing something for so long and it finally comes to fruition, you have to be prepared to put in the work to keep yourself there. And that's exactly what I'm doing. And there's really nothing on my wish list at this point other than just hoping that the readers stay with me and we can keep churning out some really exciting books with exciting twists that blow people's minds.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned putting in the work to keep going with your writing journey. What do you find to be the biggest challenge for you now at this stage in your journey? And is it the same thing that challenged you when you first started?
So when I was first trying to get published, it was frustrating because I've got this inherent drive to write. I've tried to actually stop writing when I just didn't think the dream was going to happen, and focus on my family, focus on my career, and that lasted for maybe 6 months, and then I was writing again. I have this drive to write. So the difference in the beginning was, I was writing in the hopes of getting published and not getting anywhere, but knowing I couldn't stop because I had to write anyway. Then I got published, and writing and editing and coming out with the first book and then doing all that while writing the second book, because that was the first time I ever did that, was completely overwhelming. And just, I mean, just it knocked my socks off how overwhelmed I was during that little period of time. Now I'm 6 published books in, having written the 7th one that I'm editing now. I kind of have a process down, so it's definitely not as overwhelming as it was. It's not as overwhelming at all as it was. But I'd say the new challenges are kind of trying not to rehash what you've written in terms of like, you can't keep going down the path of the husband did it or the wife did it or, that kind of a thing. Or, you've got this great twist in the 4th book, and now you feel pressure to have a twist just as good in the 5th book type of a thing. So more pressure in terms of wanting to keep the fans engaged and give them something really entertaining versus just a process.
Do you have any advice you normally give out to writers starting out or those that have been doing it for a while? Is there any advice that you received that made a difference for you that you tend to pass on?
There was no advice that I received per se, but the advice that I give is you have to be prepared to work really, really hard. Like it's easy to say, oh, I'm going to write a book and then sit down and 20 pages later, you're on to the next thing. Like that's not how it's done. Like you have to write every day. You have to constantly be reading in your genre. This is just my opinion, but especially the thriller genre, the format of the book has changed drastically over the last, 10 to 15 years. People don't have time these days to read 100 pages of character development and build up to get to the crux of the story. They've got jobs and kids and social media and homework to help with. And, everybody's busy. So, with thrillers, you kind of want to dive in right away and get to the story and get people turning the pages. But if you're not reading thrillers, you may not know that. And you're writing the way you read them, 10 years ago, and that's just not the way it's done anymore. So keeping abreast of kind of how the format is going in your genre, writing every day, not being afraid to edit and change things, listening to the people in the industry who know what they're talking about. To me, it never made any sense for a first time author to push back against an editor who's suggesting changes who's been in the industry for 30 years. They know what's going to sell. They know what the readers are going to want. They know, they're in it with you. They want to sell your book as much as you want the book to be sold. So I'm always willing to, listen to the industry professionals, when they're editing or commenting about something on the book, because, it's a business partnership and they want to sell the book as much as you do. So pushing back against everything never made much sense to me. But just, treat it like a business, put in the work, and see what happens from there. I mean, that's typically my advice.
And you mentioned that continuing on this writing journey and having these fans follow along with you was pretty amazing part of this journey. I'm guessing is that the best part of it for you, or are there other parts that you find just amazing and surprising about
I
this
think,
journey?
yeah, I mean, hearing from the fans is always incredible. That's probably my favorite part because I'm making the sausage, right? So I know what's going to happen right when I sit down to start, for the most part. But hearing from fans who are reading it, not knowing how the sausage was made, and they're just reading the finished product and they're reading how the twists unfold and whatnot, and how blown away they are is so much fun for me. But the other surprise is how welcoming the thriller community of authors are. When I first broke in and went to, a couple of writers' conferences or what have you, I literally knew no one. And, whether I was coming up to Harlan Coben or Lee Child or Jennifer Hillier or Mark Edwards or, fill in the blank, Riley Sager, they're just all so welcoming and so willing to support. We're so willing to support each other. They're so nice, and you really are part of a family. And that was a huge surprise for me because I figured, the A-listers might act a little bit like A-listers and, maybe wouldn't want to deal with a debut author or have a conversation with someone who's so new. But that never ever happened. And I have so many friends in the thriller writing community right now, and it's great.
Well, if people want to learn more about you and your books, new releases, things you have going on, where can they go to find you and that information?
Sure. So my website, mfarrellwriter.com, has all of that information as well as all my social media information on the website. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And if all else fails, you can always Google me.
And if people want to purchase a copy of The Woman at Number Six or The Perfect Mother or any of your other books, where can they go to buy them?
Yeah, I mean, they can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your local bookshop, wherever books are sold. It'll be there or it'll be orderable.
Good. Well, Matthew, I want to thank you for joining me today on the podcast. I want to wish you luck with The Woman at Number 6 and all your books, your manuscripts in progress. We'll keep our fingers crossed and look forward to those. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you. And thank you for so much for having me. This has been great.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.